Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Tokyo FinTech Podcast. Here with Matt McKibbin, who is the founder and Chief Decentralization Officer at DecentraNet. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, thank you so much for having me, Norbert. I really appreciate it. Really a pleasure to be here.
So your journey started in 2008. You graduated with a degree in physics.
Yeah, so degree in physics. I liked math and science, but I really liked working with people and talking to people. And tell you what, I'm not a lab rat. And so graduated in 2008. Obviously, the world economy. That was the year the crash. I mean, everyone kind of remembers that time too. Where were you when you heard that Bear Stearns was going under? I was in the physics lounge, honestly. I remember that. And I remember thinking a lot of like when the bailouts were about to happen and TARP, and I really hadn't been politically active in any way, shape, or form. I was always been pretty socially liberal and fiscally conservative in the sense that like, hey, the government probably shouldn't prevent people that want to marry each other or experiment with their consciousness from doing it. Probably shouldn't spend more than it has and put future people in debt. That didn't make sense. But I remember talking to some physics guys and saying, what do you mean they're printing $1 trillion? Like to like map that out in scientific notation, right? Most people can't conceptualize what $1 trillion is. And they were going to give these to banks and it's just like mind-boggling numbers. And that was one of the first times that I really took a pause and went, wait a minute, how does this money system work? That would stay with me, I think, and would stay with many people of my generation graduating around that time of saying, okay, if they're just going to print trillions of dollars, what happens? How do we get ahead in this world?
So you decided not to grow up at that time and you continued with a master's degree to figure out what the world is becoming. And obviously it was not the best time to hit the job market.
Yeah, I asked my parents. They had both gone to grad school, an MD and a PhD. And they said, go ahead, do it. I didn't really know what I was going to go. I went for industrial hygiene engineering. At the time, I barely knew what that was, but I knew I liked math, science, and I liked protecting people. I was like, all right, well, I can protect people from radiation hazards. That'll be my job. So got that degree. And it was also just paying attention to the world a lot more while I was getting the master's degree. Got out of grad school, worked at a nuclear facility. I was straight out of grad school, getting rid of depleted uranium. There's a big conversion process in Ohio. And was really getting involved in a lot of Austrian economics, Ron Paul kind of sound money movement. And in my spare time, reading Ayn Rand and reading the free market economics, Hayek and Mises and Rothbard and Ron Paul and all of that. And it really gave me a foundation for kind of looking at the world and the banking system and the problems with it. So much so that I don't think that the people in the nuclear plant liked hanging out with me very much because that's all I was talking about. I moved to Washington, D.C. for a girl. That didn't work out, but it was the first big city I had lived in. And I figured I could go back to school or figure out what I wanted to do. Became absolutely enveloped and just loved cryptocurrencies. When I found them, I was doing a radio podcast show called Liberty Panacea. Didn't even have a website, but it was like a blog talk radio where on live, my brother and I would talk about libertarian politics and what is money and the Fed and all the war stuff, because there is still stuff, but there's war going on in the Middle East. And so we were very anti that. I remember when Snowden came out with his revelations and had a big show. Very soon running the DC Bitcoin meetup and was just enthralled with the technology that was the separation of state and money. And really the separation of contracts and the state, smart contracts and figuring out that was and learning what a DAO and a DAC and all those types of dApps and things. I remember interviewing Dan Larimer on the podcast early 2014 it was. And the thing is, at the time, there wasn't a lot of language around this. The language wasn't developed enough to have a really strong and mature conversation about what a DAC was or what these applications would do or how they functioned. And it's interesting to see how that language develops over time. Whereas if you go out and you say decentralized applications, a lot of people know what that is, or decentralized protocol. And back then, very few people knew what it was. And most of the time they would just look at you like you're speaking a foreign crazy TechNet language. Or even the printing of money, no one wanted to talk about that with you. There weren't memes. There wasn't the burr, money printer go burr, as the meme is. And so it's interesting to just look at that from a historical and cultural perspective. Started investing in some token sales, MadeSafe, Storage, Mastercoin, Ethereum, put a couple Bitcoins into that. Swarm, that one didn't work out as well. Yeah, sold my car for Bitcoin in 2014. It was like, I don't need this thing in DC anymore. more and I want to buy some more Bitcoin. I wasn't actually transacting in Bitcoin, but that allowed me to put some Bitcoins into the first token sales in 2014. And that just really continued to hyper ingrain what I wanted to do and what I was passionate about, which was decentralizing the world. So much so that I bought a domain name called decentralized.me. One day that might be, worth something.
We're still living and working on internet infrastructure that has been created 50 years ago or so. We're still quite far away from the decentralized me, but there's like some green sprouts that are popping up here and there where you can see, okay, maybe this can develop into the new decentralized net. Where do you think we are currently in that development?
So we kind of had the first protocol layers coming out. That's where everyone was able to invest in the protocols. The first app of the protocols is just a unit of account that you send back and forth to people, right? This is kind of the Uber driver. I call it my Uber driver example of the Internet of Money. They go, what's that? And I say, okay, the first app is just like TCP/IP, and it was just all right, you send a message to someone. All right, and they receive that message and back and forth. We're still building this on the internet infrastructure. So there's layer ones, layer twos, and then eventually there'll be much greater layers that hyperconnect everyone. To truly have a decentralized internet and not just kind of have a protocol value layer on top of them, we're going to need to actually create a peer-to-peer type of internet. One project that I really liking is threefold.io, and threefold.tech is the for-profit, but they allow for a serverless type of infrastructure for dApps to run their network on top. That's sustainable, it's autonomous, that's equal, and there's a multi-layers on top of that. There's a digital twin that allows for you to communicate instead of on WhatsApp, I'm communicating with WhatsApp and it's going to the server and it's going to here and it's going over to there. Instead, you're communicating directly with a digital twin, which is communicating with someone else's digital twin, and it's not going to a centralized point of failure, as well as you own your data. So the new internet, in my opinion, will very much be somewhere where the experiences that we have all surround our data. We're no longer, the data is held by the corporations, and then we go to them to access it and use their app. It's we own the data, and you can build UIs around the data, and it's more like an experience that you get to go and carry your lifetime of data with you. And it also aligns incentives in a lot of ways, whereas old systems I saw a presentation by Dan Larimer and Brendan Bloomer and Brock in the EOS days, 2017 summer. They gave one of their presentations. They showed the Venn diagrams of how the incentive structures work for Uber as a structure, and you have the shareholders trying to siphon as much value off of here, you have the drivers trying to value over here, and you have the users siphoning as much value over here, and their incentives are not aligned because the shareholders want to take out, everyone wants to take out. And a DAO or a DAC is what they were saying, is that in the network everyone wants it to grow and be worth more, and the user is in the center versus the user's data that they collect. Brittany Kaiser is a really good friend of mine and huge fan of her Own Your Data campaign that's absolutely changing the world, all whistleblowing that she's done there. And I think that's probably one of the most important initiatives that we have, is our data rights are going to be our human rights in the future. If you're going to plug your brain into the computer, you better own that data, right? It's really important.
Yeah, and Brittany just had her Own Your Data conference, which was a pretty impressive showing there as well. So that's getting traction, and obviously she got the right platform from a publicity perspective.
Yeah, amazing, beautifully intelligent human being. I gave her first Burning Man ticket and said, hey, you should come into the blockchain industry. So I get to take a little bit of credit in pushing her into the right way.
Well done. Continuing from there, and with Threefold, obviously also the nodes that running the network then are truly peer-to-peer decentralized. They're not sitting on AWS instances, right? Which is the challenge we have obviously today, that yes, you have decentralization somewhere at the protocol, but then physically it's all in an AWS. But anyway, let's talk about some of the other companies that you advise and that you're really excited about.
really excited about like Chintai and Good Money. Good Money is kind of redefining what a bank is. So it's like a user democratized owned bank that the more people you invite to come put their money in, the more shares of the bank you earn. So that's kind of flipping the traditional Wells Fargo, Bank of America kind of model on its head.
It's bringing back the mutual companies of the past, like insurance companies, maybe banks to some extent also came out of the community. The depositors and the policyholders were actually owning the company. And then some point in the second half of the 20th century, we all became greedy and these mutual companies did an IPO and went public, and was this one-time event of turning that into a profitable enterprise. And now we've got the technology to bring it back to these mutual roots, which is really fascinating.
Yeah, I really enjoy that kind of mutual aid and being able to decentralize ownership of something that was centralized. We had these different types of mutual aid structures back in the day. They went and became very centralized as power was accumulating, and now we're able to democratize that access again and choose. I mean, you can choose to work with Wells Fargo or Bank of America, but you always have the choice of using something else or opting out of that type of structure. In a way, that's the grand analogy that I really talk about blockchain and the Internet of Money. It's a monetary reformation is the term that David Johnston, I think, was one of the first people that we talked about this, where, in the religious reformation, we had, in software terms, we had the open sourcing and forking of Christianity. We could take Christianity, it was translated into German by Martin Luther, right? They had the printing press, they could make lots of copies of it really quickly. Because before then, it was just in Latin and no one could read it. You had to go to the centralized authority and say, what does this say? And then they could be corrupt. You don't know what they're saying, and they could do all that stuff. So we open sourced it. We put it into a language that everyone understood. And then they were able to fork it. They were able to be a Protestant tradition. Now, there's a lot of violence in that process. I'm hoping that we would stay away from that part of it. But we're able to take centralized money and say, okay, cool, we're going to open source this. We're going to make it available for everyone. And you can try your own. And, the Catholic Church still exists. You just don't have to use them. Central banks are still going to creating their central bank digital currencies. They're going to create the digital versions of their currency, but hopefully you don't have to use them, because I think it would be rather silly to have to use them in a geographical contiguous area when the money itself, digital money, can be non-geographical. That's like the whole point. So that's why central bank digital currencies, they don't really make too much sense to me, because unless there's going to be an interface where they're all interoperable and you can say, all right, well, I'll pay with my yuan over here, I'll pay with my yen, but you can just pay with them in the United States because it's still the government currency. But otherwise, it's like, well, why have a contiguous border that's where you have to pay in that currency?
But ultimately, it's a bit of a geopolitical shot at the US dominance as well, right? At least as far as China is concerned, to push a digital yuan renminbi to weaken the dominant US position, the US dollar position.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the digital yuan is coming out. They have the blockchain system interoperate with all the different protocols. I mean, it's a centralized system. It's like a centralized database for the Chinese government to get all your financial data, in my opinion. The US has the financial data, my financial data, the NSA, all that kind of stuff. But this is definitely a play in the Chinese ones to do that. I mean, the Belt and Road is a huge initiative. And so if they do make this a requirement for the Belt and Road to work out, like, you could see these different governance and financial applications being used seamlessly through that, because it'd be like, all right, well, this is much more efficient. I don't like the CCP as a political institution, and I don't trust necessarily their centralization of power, but I do see that it will absolutely change the game when it comes to the developing world and then who they're doing business with around the world.
Agreed. And from a European perspective, I think Italy was the first country signed up to the Belt and Road Initiative. So you got a beachhead in Europe with that, which is a bit scary. Coming back to the central bank digital currencies and stable coins related to that, the private market alternatives on stable coins aren't, at least for me personally, that convincing yet either, unless you love Tether, where you have doubts. How much is backed? Is it 70%? Is it more? Is it less? attacks. And we haven't reached the true nirvana on that, let's put it this way.
Right. It's interesting to see that because the financial board just came out with all the regulations on stable coins and how they have to be essentially either completely decentralized. The protocol has to be completely decentralized in the sense that there's no central parties holding value and they can't really touch that, kind of like Ethereum and those, or they need to be essentially do full KYC and AML of all of the different holders of value in that system. So whether you're a collateral based, whether you're reserve based, and then, there's these Oracle based ones that are coming out. And the most prominent decentralized one is PegNet right now. I'm sure there will be some other ones, but PegNet allows for basically slapped on oracles that report the price of something, the median price of something every 10 minutes. They slapped on a proof of work with an LRX hash. So it's like really RAM intensive. And they've built up a tremendous amount of value on the system. I'm going to look at it right now so I can be articulate as how much value has gone through the system. As of the past 24 hours, $75 million has been exchanged in the system. The market cap is 13.5 million. And so they have like the top 20 cryptos, the top 20 fiats, and they have gold and silver. You can't get like a stable coin of the Mexican peso or the Indian rupee or the Hong Kong dollar very easily. And these have a very it's interchangeable on ERC20 and run on Factom. And there's a good argument to say that like Tether might be a ticking time bomb, especially with this new legislation coming out, that it's not fully backed, they're under regulatory pressure, and they're going to have even more pressure put on the guys. It's Bitfinex, right? That was the entity that really backed that project. And are they going to be able to come into compliance with the new things? And I'm skeptical of them being able to do that. What are our alternatives for decentralized systems? Or are we just going to go to all centralized stablecoins and then it's just extensions of central banks? PegNet is something that I'm really excited about. I've been chatting with David Johnston, who's an old crypto OG friend of mine. He's here in Austin. We're socially distant, but I get to see him on Zoom occasionally. I've been working with him on some of the arbitrage trades. As with like early systems, especially early liquidity systems, there can be a large arbitrage going into the network. If anyone has any interest in that kind of stuff, let me know. There's some cool trades going on.
I was fortunate enough to meet David in Osaka last year. So that was the very early days of him evangelizing around PegNet. There was an evening presentation, etc. So it was quite interesting. Even as robust as it's constructed with 50 oracles that are feeding into it, there was an attack only last week or so trying to manipulate the Japanese yen price. The malicious miners managed to manipulate the price, but then were not able to get the money out because there are safeguards in there. So it was a good and bad story in the same way.
Yeah, if you're not getting attacked, you're doing something wrong. If you're in DeFi and people aren't trying to figure out a way to penetrate your network might actually be very valuable. And so like David Johnston had tweeted out like another milestone in the history of PegNet being able to repel the first 51% attack, and the peg conversion limitations were what kind of saved the hacker from being able to take it and had to burn it away. So I'm sure there will be more attempts, any type of distributed system. That's the whole point of is if you can't repel those types of things, you're not a robust distributed decentralized system. Bitcoin has had plenty of attacks on it over the course of its 10 plus years lifetime. And we'll see, we could even see more with the halvening, if the big drop in mining power, because the price hasn't gone up that much, the miners might not be able to think like there's still attack vectors and things. So I'm not a super mining technical person, but I understand the basics.
Yeah, totally. And as you said, if you're not important enough to be attacked, then you have a business problem in the first place. What is your perspective on when we had Black Thursday and MakerDAO, for example, had some trouble, which wasn't really an attack, and maybe you can take a view, it's conceptual problems in the protocol, but it's like stress testing it by the market, basically, and some people clearly lost money.
Yeah, that's one of the flaws of collateral-based systems, that if you get a big enough jolt to the system, you can lose your collateral. And I know a lot of people that lost a lot of more Bitcoin than I have in some of the collaterals of either lending, they were, lending out, or in actually like the MakerDAI, you have to have that price relationship. So, and then in that, their solution was to start backing some of the collateral with USDC, which is further centralization of the collateral in the solution. Now, maybe they'll be able to unwind that eventually. I believe that was how people like currency traders have made a lot of different money, is being able to know how to push on a system so hard that when it snaps, they're in a great position. And so as it gets bigger and as it potentially plugs into even more liquid and like the FX market, these are tiny, tiny, tiny markets comparatively. And so we'll see as they get into the big boys club, we'll see what types of attacks and especially with futures out there too, they can leverage and put pressure on the price.
We started with 2008 and printing trillions, and 12 years later, we're here again, we're printing multiple trillions. How does that make you feel, how much we have progressed in this period of time?
I'm a lot less worried about it than I was a decade ago. I'll tell you what, I have a lot less anxiety and fear. I also, just think it's good to watch a system. Like, we know that the system isn't functioning right. We know that our world financial system is broken because there's large centralized powers that get to print money and give it to their friends and give it to their cronies, and the whole world is watching that, and you say that and people go, yeah, that's messed up. A decade ago you said that and people looked at you with a blank stare because they had no idea what you were talking about, because they didn't understand what money was. And they still don't understand what money is, but they understand that it's corrupt and that it's very transparent. And so as this type of event with COVID and the economy having a massive downturn, it's catastrophic, it's terrible, but what comes out of the ashes as we build more and more resilient systems will be much better. Really intelligent tech and monetary people and financial people are going, okay, you're right. This thing, consciousness, they're rising in their consciousness going, all right, cool. All right, let's go build on this internet of money. This is now not just a fringe thing. And so what comes out of the ashes of this, I think, will be the form of the new system. And it'll operate in parallel for a while. I don't want to tear the old one down immediately. Like, having that attitude of just like, oh, just destroy it isn't good. It's build in parallel as much as possible and have something to catch the people that are interested in building on a transparent and fair and moral and ethical system versus one that centralizes power and has poor incentive structures. There's a lot of people dying out there. There's a lot of people that are hungry. We're not over and out of this, but I do think that this great reset that we have, great kind of sunshine is showing on what our systems are, and it allows for us to improve them.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic perspective, positive outlook on all of this. I mean, similar to what you said on the central bank digital currencies earlier, our current financial system is somewhat anchored in the nation state. And so if we're really thinking about decentralization, it would also be borderless. And so in this parallel build process, the old system will degrade slowly based on the nation state. And in parallel, what you're growing is fully global, decentralized, and full access for anybody. And so it's maybe the different dimension in that, right, where it's applicable.
Yeah, and I don't know whether like smaller jurisdictions, you could have city-state currencies. You could have a global jurisdiction in some way where you buy into governance services and that has some sort of token of value within it, because not only is it the money system, but it's the governance systems that can be put onto this transparent ledger system. And, one of the first projects that I kind of worked on was BitNation. I kind of blew the whistle on it. There's a Bitcoin magazine article, original guys going, hey, don't invest in this crazy thing. Like, we wanted to work on it, but it's not real. Don't do it. They were issuing crypto equity in 2014 on top of Bitcoin. It was like, that's how you go to jail. But the vision is still there, being able to do global governance services on a transparent, democratized system is still there. I mean, Tony Lane, she just passed away. She was one of the great early visionaries in this industry. She was worked on, V Nation and then Culture, and it kind of carried that torch. We don't know what the money systems, like that's the beauty of it. We don't know what the money systems of the future are. We know kind of like what the values will be a little bit. Like we know how we want to put, what values we want to put into those systems, and then how do those values get reflected into the incentive structures around there? How do we do like a regenerative system? If you look at the dollar system, right, in cryptocurrency terms, it's a utility token for oil backed by proof of violence. Buy my utility token, buy my oil token, or you can't buy any oil around the world. And if you don't do it, we're gonna come get you. And so we clearly want to flip that on its head. And maybe there's a regenerative currency that's proof of stake, that everyone has a stake around the thing, but you have to prove that you're growing a regenerative part of your community. You prove that you operate your local hydroponics farm or your community, so everyone's resilient. I would say solar types of energy stuff might be a similar or competing one, but it definitely will be flipped. Instead of pulling oil out of the ground, burning it, and making everyone use that as the backing of the currency, we're going to probably regenerate the world and use it as a currency.
That's fascinating. For the last question, maybe take a completely different tack. So all the crypto, blockchain, decentralization vector is one of your passions. The other passion is on hemp and everything that's mindful related. So let's talk a bit about what you're doing in that space.
Sure. One of the other concepts is like we have all these technological solutions, and one of the things I realized is we can build all these incentive structures, we can build all these technological solutions, but if we don't focus on the human OS, it's not going to matter. We need to upgrade ourselves, upgrade our own operating systems. And that's another side of things. So like psychedelics and I guess nootropics and the next gen therapeutics, if you will, whether they were banned chemicals before or not, it's really important to kind of upgrade your consciousness. We launched a company called AMMA Healing last year. It's a wellness company that's currently using hemp-derived products with no THC. So we're not attempting to, you're not getting high off of anything, but you're able to take CBD and your built-in chemical relationship with hemp in your endocannabinoid system and use it as a nootropic and a cognitive enhancement and get your body out of the fight or flight mode. A lot of people are so stressed all the time that they barely have a chance to kind of really think and sit with themselves. And a lot of what this kind of plant medicine is it allows you to kind of clear that monkey mind and meditate a little bit more and get yourself out of the constant fight or flight parasympathetic nervous system. Another thing that we just came out with, hemp elixir. So it was a replacement for alcohol, an alcohol alternative. So it gets you in a loose, sociable buzz feeling, but without booze. So that's, alcohol, I'm not a big fan of alcohol in general. It's something I quit last year, and it's something I'm passionate about is kind of upgrading human consciousness in that sense. And we're going to find out that a lot of these chemicals that we're in a psychedelic renaissance right now. So psilocybin and acid and DMT and all these types of banned chemicals for a really long time, we're kind of finding out they may actually be really good for our cognitive enhancement, and then proving those things out over time is going to take, but we're at least allowed to do the experimentation now versus even 5 years ago, that was a very taboo subject. 5 years ago, even cannabis was a taboo subject, right? In many parts of the world, and now they're awakening. So take the decentralized technology stacks that allow us to interact without trusting other humans around the world, and then take the internal human operating stack and upgrade that as much as possible. I think is the two things I'm passionate about in this world.
And it's the right product at the right time. I think many people being in lockdown are just reassessing how they spent their life over the last decade or so, and whether the values that they've been chasing are the right values. And so anything that allows you to lift up your mind to a different level and look upon yourself and where you stand and what's important to you, I think it's a very successful, promising future for that type of approach.
Right. I said this minutes at a talk, not everyone's going to have a crazy, really heroic dose of some psychedelic, right? But imagine that there were millions or billions of people taking a microdose every couple of days, and what they're showing with the emotional intelligence and the leadership and the little improvements, ensuring that you're making better decisions on a day-to-day basis, that will massively shift consciousness and our collective consciousness in the world. So
super. Thank you very much, Matt. Great conversation. Any final closing comments?
Yeah, check me out on AMMAhealing.co, DecentraNet.com. You can add me, follow me on Twitter, Matt_McKibbin. And I was doing a podcast for a while and ended it with, we're all in space. No one knows what's going on. And I love you.
Wonderful. Thank you.